Okay, now I'm recording. Okay, so first we're going to have a civil war in France. And as you can see, it lasts 36 years. All right, so but in those long wars, people take a break and then they flare up again. They take a break and then they flare up again. But France in the 16th century becomes a very chaotic place. And in the 17th century, it's going to get its act together and become the most powerful nation in Europe. So the we have different dynasties, okay, in each country, right? They're ruled by different families. If we look at medieval France, that was the Franks, right? Like Charlemagne was a Frank, Pepin the Short was a Frank, Charles the Bald was a Frank, okay? And then that gave way to the Capetians. And then the Capetians ruled like Philip the Fair, remember him, invader of Italy and stuff? And then we get the Valois, all right? And the Valois had a very good king, Henry II, or Henri, all right? And he was a good king. He was powerful, respected, solid leader, up for the job. But then, unfortunately, he participated in the official hobby of noble people, jousting, right? So we were familiar with jousting, yes. And I'll run that back again. So he was jousting in a tournament, and he took a lance right in the face and went right through his helmet and killed him. And so he dies unexpectedly. And one of the big problems with monarchy is that you have to leave the throne to your sons, even if your sons aren't up for the job, okay? But luckily, Henri has 3 sons, right? Here, this is Poger talking, and I wouldn't say Henry III is weak. He's not super strong, but he's better than his brother. So Francis II is going to be king for a little while, and then he will die, and then Charles IX, and then lastly, Henri III. Henry III will be the last Valois king of France, and we'll talk about him and the others in a minute. Now, hopefully I've talked about when a king is young, too young to really rule, it's called a regency, right? And someone makes decisions for them because they're still a kid. And so the regent for all 3 of these kings was their mama, Catherine de' Medici. Right? And yes, she is related to those Medicis. There's a French branch of the Medici family, as well as the Italian branch of the Medici family. And she was their mother. And when the Civil War starts, she's basically going to do, and this might sound familiar these days, she's going to do whatever she has to do to stay in power. And so she's going to switch sides, double deal, backstab, etc., etc. So, bear with me again. There we go. No, yes. All right. And she's cruel and ruthless to keep power. So, put in the chat, first correct spelling gets a point. Who would agree, at least with her as I've described her? Do what you have to do to keep power, and don't let sentimentality get in the way. Oh, Ella gets it with the spella. Ishus. I don't know who that is, but I think that would be a great rap name. Ishus? Yeah. Think of all you could rhyme with: delicious, vicious. Okay. Anyone running for president these days, except Marianne Williamson. She was sweet, wasn't she? You guys probably don't remember her. But she just wanted us all to feel better and control our breathing, which is a good idea. So, so even though this is not a person, don't ruin it, Bryson. I love Ishus. So, this is a very sexist time, but keep in mind, women can be just as cruel and manipulating and conniving as men can. All right, ladies? So don't forget that. So here she is. in her, you know, dowerage, right? Yeah, dowager, yeah. Here's Francis II, and he married Mary Stuart. Okay. Mary Stuart has a more famous name known to history because of where she's from. She ain't French. She's from somewhere else. Does anybody know what we know her as? She wasn't Queen of the English. Yes, Ella. Mary, Queen of Scots. And she's a member of the Stuart family. And the Stuart family, like some families, I'm not going to name particular ones, but it's a hardcore Catholic family, okay? A big hardcore Catholic family. Yeah, you know who you are. And so they basically have a tremendous amount of power and desire to stop the Protestant Reformation, okay? Hi, Gina. So we're going to get a civil war. And guess how the sides break down? The Guises, even more hardcore than the Stuarts, really. They are the Catholic faction in the north. And then the Huguenot, and somebody besides Ella, tell me, Huguenot, those are French followers of who? Who is the founder of their religion? No, good guess, but no. Yeah. Lena Bachman, Kylie and Lena, good. Calvin, John Calvin, right? So they're called Huguenot, right? And like I said last week, Calvinism becomes much more popular than Lutheranism, and really it's the basis for most Protestant sects these days. So in France, we have Huguenot, that's French Calvinists. In Scotland, Scottish Calvinists are called Presbyterians. Some of you may belong to a Presbyterian church. And in Britain, or England particularly, they're called Puritans. Okay, so there's Calvinists all over the place. In Holland, they're just mainly called Calvinists. So we have a noble family, the Bourbons, and the Protestant faction against a Catholic family, the Guise, and the Catholic faction. And they both have claim to the throne. And we have sick, weak sons ruling France, so they want to be lined up to take it. And in the first phase, Catherine being Catholic herself, she supports the Guises because probably her true feelings, if she has any, no, that was unfair, are to keep France Catholic. And in that, she participates in something, an infamous event in history known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And there's a good story, but don't worry, you're going to wade into this after the lecture. So Catherine had wanted to end the Protestants once and for all. And the Duke of Guise, who he started the French Wars of Religion by riding his horse into a Calvinist church during services and killing everybody in there at church to make his point. So I told you the Guises were hardcore. And so she conspires with the Duke of Guise to carry out this one-time settle all scores, end of Godfather 1, kill everybody move, where there's going to be a wedding. There's going to be a wedding in Paris, and Henry of Navarre, the head of the Bourbons, is going to marry a Bourbon princess. And they're hoping, since Henry is the leading Protestant and she is Catholic, they're trying to make things better. But since the country's in a civil war, all the people attending the wedding in Paris had to agree to leave their weapons outside the city gates. And so this is a perfect time to attack. Okay, so all the Protestant leaders of France are at this wedding in Paris and mostly drunk, and that's when the Catholics attack. Okay, August 24th, that's my anniversary. And they attack Paris, and they have coordinated attacks all over the country. They slaughter 3,000 unarmed Protestants in Paris, and around the country it adds up to about 20,000 Huguenots who are killed. And Henry of Navarre survives. And now this is going to be a huge international incident. This is basically, you have the Guises, and then who do we have in Spain? We haven't talked about them nearly enough. Who's ruling Spain and wants Catholicism everywhere? He's like, he built his own church. No, it's Ferdinand's great grandson, Charles V's son. Yes, Nate Finch. Yes, Philip II. All right, so Philip II is a powerful Catholic ruler of Spain, and Spain now during the 16th century is the 400-pound gorilla because they've got all that money coming in from the New World. Okay, they have all this territory, and Philip is trying anywhere he sees struggle between Catholic and Protestant, he's hardcore backing the Catholic side. So you have Philip trying to spread Catholicism back. You have Loyola and the Jesuits, which you read about, reconverting places like Poland and the Rhine River Valley. And so Protestants are like, oh no, this clapback could end us. So people like Elizabeth I become very worried about Protestantism surviving at all. And so they start to work internationally and cooperate against these large Catholic networks. Right? So this is a big signal that gets Protestants to try to work together throughout Europe. And there's a picture of it. Lots of hacking and whacking. But under Henry's leadership, the Protestants actually get the upper hand on the Guises and the Stuarts, and another family called the Montmorency-Chantillon, which thankfully you don't have to know about or spell. And so Catherine switches sides. What happened there? Oh, this didn't come in. Is it going to come in now? Nope. Oh, well, there's a cool graphic there. Maybe it'll come in at the end. All right. So basically you have the Catholic League on one side and the Protestant Union on the other side. And the Protestant Union is gaining the upper hand. So Catherine switches sides. And ultimately there's a peace treaty, and her son Henry III becomes king. But then because they had made some peace with the Protestants, he's assassinated by a fanatical Catholic. And that makes Henry Bourbon, he's in line to become king. And so he becomes Henry IV of France. All right. Well, as we'll see, France will be, and I can't say permanently divided because in 1686, I think, it's going to be forced to be all Catholic again. Right? But for a while, the power of the monarchy is greatly weakened. But they're gonna just remember this stuff when we get to Louis XIV. The Valois' time ruling France is done. Now we're gonna have Bourbons, and we'll have Bourbons all the way up through Louis XVIII and Charles X, and then the very last ruling family will be from the Orleans. All right, but it's gonna be Bourbons this whole semester. Oh, there it is. So Protestant Union versus the Catholic League. All right, and so bloody civil war ends with Henry IV really as the foundational monarch for the new France. All right. So here's Henry IV entering into Paris. It's a pretty faded image, but you see him there, right, in his armor. And Henry IV is a charismatic guy, very capable leader and administrator, as well as, you know, a warrior. But even though he fought for the Protestant side, he decides in the interest of France, well, one, he's going to end Philip's interference. He's going to basically say, I don't care, you know, if you're pro-Catholic or not, France is France and Spain is Spain, stay out. And then he's going to surprise a lot of his allies by he converts to Catholicism. Why does he become a Catholic? Because 90% of France is Catholic. And in the interest of peace, he wants to be the religion of the majority of the French people. Or his famous quote is, Paris is worth a mass. Okay, so he's willing to become Catholic to maintain peace in the country. Right? And this qualifies him as what we call a politique. And sometimes there's FRQs or essay questions on, you know, describe two politiques and say why. A politique is someone who puts national unity ahead of religious purity. Okay, so and Elizabeth I we'll see is one of these as well. They're not going to push religious issues if that's going to divide the nation. And so they want to make the different religious factions get along. So Henry IV is a politique. Catherine de' Medici, you might say, well, she worked on both sides. She didn't seem to care about religion. Yeah, but she wasn't a politique because she created division and disunity by switching sides. Okay, you have to unify your nation in times of religious struggle to be called a politique. And then in 1598, he passes the Edict of Nantes. Nantes, not Nantes or Nantes. It's the Edict of Nantes, okay? And that's a place where he issues the edict. And what that does is it grants religious rights to Huguenots, but it's not religious freedom like we enjoy now. All right, it basically says in areas that are already Protestant dominated, the Protestants can continue to worship, but only there. Okay, so you can't have a big Protestant community in Paris or Orleans, only in Protestant towns. And it allows the Huguenots to fortify their towns to defend themselves in case things get hectic again. All right, so it's not religious freedom for all. It's freedom to be Catholic or Huguenot. All right, and we're going to see a lot of gradual granting of religious liberties all the way up until 1688 for political reasons, but it's not religious liberty like we enjoy now. So Henry IV of France, we'll revisit him later because he is going to be a very powerful king, and he's going to have a very competent finance minister, the Duke of Sully, and he is going to lay the groundwork for his son, Louis XIII. And Louis XIII became son very young because Henry IV was assassinated by guess who? A fanatical Catholic who didn't like the Edict of Nantes. So Louis XIII becomes king very young, and his regent is a French cardinal named Richelieu. And Richelieu's so good at running France that Louis XIII says, yeah, knock yourself out. You run France. And then Louis XIII's son is going to be the very famous Louis XIV. Right? But that's later. Not much, though. All right, so let's get to the biggie. Let's get to the 30 Years' War. All right, any questions about the French Wars of Religion before we move on? What should you take out of that? Edict of Nantes, Bourbons come to power, international mistrust between Protestants and Catholics because of the St. Bart's Day massacre. Okay, that's what you need to take away from that. Now, the biggie, all right? The year 1618. Now, this is my little interim part here I put in. 1618. The place, Germany, or Holy Roman Empire. The problem is the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, which you read about, but we haven't talked about. So you had that early round of religious civil war. Remember we talked about how Zwingli and Luther couldn't unite because of their different theological views on the Eucharist, and they're fighting against the Catholic forces of Charles V. So they have all these civil wars in Germany and Switzerland, and those are temporarily ended in 1555 by the Peace of Augsburg. Okay? Again, Augsburg is a place. Most of these things are named after the place where they're signed or issued. And as you know, the Peace of Augsburg establishes this principle: Cuius regio, eius religio, which means as goes the ruler, so goes the religion. So all of these hundreds of German princes, they get to pick what religion their region's going to have. But there's only two items on the menu. You can be Catholic or you can be Lutheran. So, and you pick for your whole region. And if your prince picks Lutheran and you're Catholic, move. And if your prince stays Catholic and you're Lutheran, move. So they want people to sort themselves out. But that's going to get messy, as we'll see. All right. So what's been happening since 1555? Well, the Catholic areas have gradually been losing ground and territory as more and more Lutherans come in. And so certain cities and towns that were guaranteed to Catholics by the Peace of Augsburg are now predominantly Lutheran, right? So the Catholics aren't happy with what we call the status quo. They're not happy with the deal, right? Another group that's really not happy with the deal are the Calvinists, because Calvinism is not on the menu. And as I said, it becomes very, very popular. So no Calvinism allowed. So of the three major religious groups, Catholics, Calvinists, and the Lutherans, the guys with their hands up, they're not happy with the current deal. They're willing to roll the dice, or, as is the phrase, upset the apple cart. Okay? The status quo is not in their favor, so they don't have any interest in maintaining peace. And this is a problem. This is what you always work for in diplomacy, is to make sure all sides have an interest in maintaining peace. Once a side feels that war would be better, you're probably going to get war. And now 2 out of 3 are itching for a conflict, which is the 30 Years' War. And here is the Holy Roman Empire, smack dab in the middle of Europe. And as you see, that's going to be really convenient for all the other European powers who want to come and fight in Germany for many different reasons. So it's fought in Germany. All right. Catholics versus Protestants. Here's why this is going to be the last war of religion. It starts as a struggle between Catholics versus Protestants, but by the end of the war, you're going to have Catholics and Protestants on both sides fighting each other, and so then it's not about religion anymore, it's about politics. All right. And we're going to get the Treaty of Westphalia, which is going to make the boundaries of Europe pretty much, I mean, that's going to be the biggest adjustment to European boundaries until probably 1878. All right, so there's 4 phases in the war, sort of named for the regions again where things happen. The first phase is the Bohemian phase. And where is Bohemia? Who do we know that was from Bohemia? What guy do we know who was Bohemian? And he ended up kind of crispy. Yes, Kylie, good job. Working without a milkshake today and nailing it. Yes, all right. Jan Hus. Okay, so this is modern day Czech Republic. And Ferdinand II, very Catholic, inherits Bohemia, right? And he's the Holy Roman Emperor. And the Bohemians, who many of them are Protestant, hate him. Right? And he says, look, this is my, see, so he inherits it. It had been under Protestant control. Now Ferdinand II, the Holy Roman Emperor, gets it. And he says, I'm not going to have Protestants living in my territory. And so things are getting a little bit testy. And so he sends 2 ministers from from Vienna to Bohemia to try to work things out, and basically to let the Protestants know, hey, you need to convert or hit the road. And that's where we get a famous incident in history, and it gives us an awesome word, defenestration. Okay, and if we were in class, I would ask, what does defenestration mean? But I know you all know now. So what happens is the 2 Catholic ministers go to the Protestants and meet them in essentially their, what is essentially a castle. And the response of the Protestants to the Catholics laying down the hard line is they throw the Catholic ministers out a window. And that's literally what defenestrate means. Okay, so you can today, defenestrate something, throw something out a window, be a part of history. Okay, you got a window, throw something out of it. So what they throw out of the window, these 2 advisors, and they're essentially, the top of the castle is like maybe 4 stories in modern architectural parlance. They're thrown out a window and they fall and they survive. Okay. The reason they survive, well, if you're a Catholic, they survive. Why? It's a miracle. God protected them on their way down. If you're a Protestant, they survive because they land in a dried moat that was filled with manure and broke their fall. Okay, so it's either a miracle or a pile of crap, all right, depending on your perspective. But that's considered the official starting of all the trouble, because that then is going to cause Ferdinand to react harshly. Our little graphics just aren't coming in. The Bohemians then, after they defenestrate him, see here, this guy's getting ready. This guy's currently, he's being defenestrated. And he still doesn't really know what defenestrate means. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And the Bohemians say, no, you're not in charge, Ferdinand. We're going to name our own king, Frederick V. And we're our own kingdom now, and we're a Protestant kingdom. And So Ferdinand, okay, so just after inheriting Bohemia, he officially gets voted in by the 7 electors to become the Holy Roman Emperor. Does anybody remember what papal document gave the electors the power to do this, that they vote for the Holy Roman Emperor? This is 2 chapters back, at least. It's not a silver cow. Ah, Hamas, a golden bowl. Good job. Yeah. And so so we get open conflict now down in Bavaria, and other Protestants in the Holy Roman Empire, especially Calvinist Protestants, see this, and they are inspired to also rebel. And so here's the Bohemian phase, and all the battles and things. Okay. And again, Protestants are a union and Catholics are league. And then we get the second phase, the Danish phase. Okay. The initial phase goes very well for the Catholics. Yes, Sadie, it is. It goes very well for the Catholics. And the Protestants are on the brink of defeat. Thank you. And so the Catholic League is basically going to say, look, let's end it now. Let's strike while the iron is hot. Let's get rid of Protestantism in Europe altogether. Okay. And then we get an outsider. Our first outsider comes in. Well, the reason they're doing so well is Ferdinand has hired just this diabolical guy, Albrecht of Wallenstein, and he's a mercenary and a general and very capable military leader, and they are whooping on the Protestant forces. And at this time, it's called the Danish phase. And she doesn't tell you why. The King of Denmark, King Christian IV, he brings Danish forces in to try to help the Protestants to really have their back up against the ocean, and he doesn't do well. But at least the Protestants are not completely wiped out yet. And then that gives us the first attempt of many to try to end this war. And we get the edict, another edict of restitution. Now this one, it wasn't issued in Restitution, the town of. It means an edict of putting things back the way they were supposed to be. So they said, okay, we'll give everything, we'll give you back all the lands you've lost since the Peace of Augsburg. And we're going to say there are no more Calvinists, okay? Only Lutherans. So no guarantee of rights for Calvinists. So is this going to last long? Does pretending this intervening 80 years never happened, is that going to work? No. All right. And the German princes are always jealous of their power. They never want a Holy Roman Emperor who's going to be as strong as like a king of France or a king of Britain and really rule over them. So Ferdinand gets rid of Wallenstein. Eventually, Wallenstein, the guy's a mercenary. Okay, he's going to sign with another team, right? So you lose your favorite player, they're not going to retire from the sport. They're going to sign with somebody else, and maybe the team you hate the most. And so Wallenstein is making offers to go over to the Protestant side, and then Ferdinand has him assassinated. So that ends the time of Wallenstein. All right. Which gives us then the Swedish phase. And this, so if you're using like a football analogy, the Danish phase is the first quarter. And I would say it's Catholics 14, Protestants 0. And so the second quarter comes, and we get the Swedish phase. And this is when France and Sweden now get involved. All right. Lutheran Sweden and Catholic France are coming in on the side of the German Protestants. Why? It doesn't have anything to do with religion. They don't want Ferdinand and the Habsburgs in general to get too powerful. But the Protestants, they put in their backup quarterback. And Sweden leads the charge. France provides initially, and this is Richelieu, the guy we're going to talk about next week, providing support for the Protestants in terms of finance. Right? And your new quarterback is Gustavus Adolphus, the King of Sweden. And he invades the Holy Roman Empire. He has changed military tactics in a new way, which makes him very successful. But sorry for some of you that are into it, military history is not really something the AP cares about. But essentially, he creates new formations and new military units that are more effective. And the Protestant forces, led by Sweden, start to win. All right? Okay, he brings back Wallenstein, then he kills him. The Swedish are stopped, but they're making gains. The German princes are still nervous, which means they might defect over to the Protestant side. And then that's when Ferdinand has him assassinated. Not just to appease the princes, but because Ferdinand tried to change sides. So there's your Swedish phase. So you see all the orangey striped stuff. That's either directly dependent on or allied with Sweden. So they are making a strong push into northeast Germany. Southern Germany, and keep this in mind for later, much later, southern Germany remains in Catholic hands. There's Gustavus Adolphus being crowned with laurels, you know, sainted in a way, but Protestants don't dig on saints. So just sort of the crown of God's approval. And he is killed in battle at the Battle of White Mountain, which basically, now deprived of their best leader, the Protestants are not going to be as successful. Which takes us then into the French phase, or the international phase. And some people split this phase. That's why sometimes there's 4 phases. But Poger puts them all together. There's the French phase and then the international phase. All right. So with Gustavus Adolphus dead, Catholic France takes direct leadership of the Protestant forces. Right? And now everybody's involved. Even Elizabeth over in England, and later James I are involved in this. And this is the most destructive phase. This is basically the Habsburgs, the Valois, the Tudors, and then the Stuarts. They all want to take a swing at each other. And since all the troops are already in Germany, let's just fight there, right? So all these foreign armies decide we're going to fight in Germany so we don't mess up our own country. And so you get over a decade more of warfare that the Germans didn't want. All right, the Germans had tried to issue a peace, I think the Peace of Prague it was called, where all the Germans, the German Protestants, the German Catholics, the princes, they all agreed to a peace. But first Gustavus Adolphus and then Richelieu, Philip II, they didn't want to stop fighting. So even though the Germans wanted the war to end, they weren't united enough to keep these other countries from continuing the war in their country and killing their people and eating their food and breaking their fine china and things like that. So this last phase that the Germans didn't even want is the one that really destroys much of Germany. German towns are sometimes wiped out. Agriculture collapses because there's rampant, first of all, killing of peasants and burning of their villages. And then also these armies, they don't provision themselves. They just take food from the local population. And so we get famine and death, and then famine leaves you physically weakened, so we get disease. And basically 8 million people, all right, a third of the population die during the time of the 30 Years' War. And that's the German population, I mean, right? So are the Germans bitter about this? You bet, all right? And when do they get their turn? Well, that's next semester. But keep 30 Years' War in mind when we get to second semester Germany, all right? And Europeans have a long memory, all right? When we get to 1870, they're still pissed about this. Massive inflation, all right? And trade is set back throughout Europe. And there's a graph of, you see the deadliest places to be, right? The Palatinate, Würzburg, Northeastern, which will become Prussia eventually. Those are the deadliest places. Then Bohemia, Bavaria, Magdeburg. The areas that stay solidly in hands of Catholics are the most peaceful because the fighting happens to the north. And then finally in 1648, we get the Peace of Westphalia, like those cool Volkswagen campers. And it's going to set things in Europe for, Well, there'll be some adjustments in 1714, but basically, this is going to be how Europe's going to look for the rest of the early modern period. All right. So, technically, well, technically it still exists, but in any terms of political reality, this ends the Holy Roman Empire. There's still going to be a Holy Roman Emperor, but that's basically just going to be the Habsburg monarchy, and they're only going to control what they already controlled. The other German princes don't have to do anything that the Holy Roman Emperor says. They're all independent now. Right? One of the strongest places of Protestant resistance and advancement is the Low Countries, which initially are what we now call Belgium and Holland, and the northern part, which becomes modern day Holland, and the southern part is Belgium. So Belgium stays Catholic, and Holland becomes Protestant, and then they are permanent. They are officially recognized as a country. So Holland is created on the new map from the Peace of Westphalia. All right. And then there's two little border provinces wedged between Germany and France. And every time Germany and France fight, the winner gets Alsace and Lorraine. Okay. So France gets Alsace in order to stop fighting in Germany at this time. And Sweden gets chunks of northern Germany and the Black Sea coast. And Sweden could have been a major power, but they're going to have a crazy king who's just going to launch a whole series of wars that greatly weaken Sweden and keep it from being a major player from here on. Right? And Switzerland becomes officially recognized as one single place. And it's independent. Now, later on, it'll be recognized as officially neutral in all things, but not quite yet. And Sweden gets representation in the Holy Roman Empire, which really, how much is that worth since the Holy Roman Emperor has no power? All right. And Brandenburg. So, religious provisions. Here's what started the whole thing. Let's see how it ends up. All right. So now, after 30 years and millions of deaths, three things on the menu. Your prince can choose for you Lutheranism, Calvinism, or Catholicism. Except the Habsburgs. If you're on a Habsburg land, you're staying Catholic. And here are all the guys gathered to sign the Treaty of Westphalia. Here's our map. Okay. So, new countries. So the Dutch Republic becomes a new nation, and then the southern Low Countries are the Spanish Netherlands. Now, we didn't talk too much about this, but when Charles V dies, the people who live here don't really like Philip II, and so they fight a revolution against Philip II, which ultimately he's able to reconquer half his territory, which are now called the Spanish Netherlands, not because the people that live there are Spanish, but because they're controlled by Spain. Okay? And then we get the Dutch Republic. And then we also get an official place called Switzerland. Right? So two new countries added to the map. But the sign of any good compromise is that nobody's happy. Right? Protestants feel betrayed. The Pope doesn't like anything that officially recognizes Protestantism. Essentially, and by no one was happy, this means nobody in Germany. The other European powers were, some of them were satisfied, especially France. But essentially, the only good thing is it ended the war. And after 30 years, they were desperate to end the war. And basically, this war was blamed for everything that goes wrong in Central Europe, and rightly so. You're going to have, in Western Europe, you're going to have the development of these nation states we've been looking at. You're going to have Spain and France and Britain. And then in Central Europe, it's just going to be a mess for a long time. Which, guess what? Western Europe likes that. They don't want a powerful nation to their east, and they want a buffer between them and Russia once Peter the Great becomes Tsar. We'll talk about him later. All right. And I think that brings us to the end of a very Confusing time. Yep. Okay. So there's the 30 Years' War. And what I want you to do, so the rest of your class time, you're going to actually read an account of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Oh, that's instructions right now. So, this is a French Protestant noble named de Thou, and he lived through it. So what kind of document is this? Put it in the chat. What kind of document is this? Yeah. Oh, Chloe. Nice. Primary source. Or Emily, a primary document would also be acceptable. All right. So he's going to describe the slaughter that happens in Paris, which I think you'll find interesting if you're a fan of violence. And then over here, simple, super simple thing. All right. As you read to answer these questions, okay? Why do the commanders say now's the time to strike? Let's crush the Protestants. And then one of the main heroes of the Protestant movement is Gaspard de Coligny, the Protestant leader, and he's the main character of this document you're going to read, right? And so why is he not afraid of death? You can probably guess. Why do they defile his body? And who do they send his head to? All right, students have trouble answering this, but they send his head to somebody as a present. So be thinking to yourself, who would want Coligny's head as a gift? And what does his body come to symbolize after the massacre? And what's the ultimate disposition? What do they ultimately do with his body? So a lot of questions about Coligny's body because it's, I think, significant. All right, but I think you'll find this interesting and not too taxing, and then get going on chapter 6. All right. Any questions about anything? All right. Let me stop recording.